And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is contributor Shayne Kubas. We are here to talk Steelers football. We are going to preview the Steelers versus Texans game, big game coming up here, see if Steelers can keep that win streak going in week 4. We're also going to talk about some pretty disgusting stats from the Pittsburgh Steelers season so far, some things you might not be aware of, so stick around for that. I want to start off, though, let's talk about some of the trending news in this week, and let's rehash that Steelers versus Raiders Sunday night football game. Obviously, Steelers held on for the 23-18 victory. Wasn't quite as clean as you'd like it to be. Certainly more clean than the Browns win in the week prior. But what are your overall thoughts on that game, Shayne? Were you satisfied with the manner in which the Steelers won?
Satisfied would be a strong word, right? I don't know if I'm so much satisfied. And if you guys do want to see a full breakdown of the game, we did do one on our Curtain Call show. Just plugging that for the YouTube as well. It's on Tuesdays. You should see that come out. But in general, yeah, I wasn't satisfied because again, we haven't seen this team put together a true, just like dominant, complete game, right? Like the offense was better this week, but it still was lacking in a lot of areas. The defense made some big plays, but overall, we're pretty beat up a lot of the time in the passing game, especially. The running defense was much better against Josh Jacobs, who has struggled this year. So it's kind of hit or miss there. But just again, we just haven't seen this team just put together a game that when they're clearly better than their opponent and just beat them down. Look that way, 23-7, the Raiders kind of got back into it thanks to some questionable calls, we'll call it. But still, it was not the complete performance that we've been looking for.
Yeah, I think that's what fans are missing still, right? We want to see. I mean, since really the end of Prime Ben, like the Steelers have had a lot of trouble, just finishing games,
away,
blowing them out, putting them out of their misery early in the second half of the game. Like we're just not getting that from the Steelers. It's been years since we have really, and so that's what we want to see next. I mean, we are at such a lack of these 30-point games now. Over the past couple of years, it's getting to the point where it's just a disgusting stat. We have to be able to kind of put these teams away, and I hope that that's coming soon, Shayne.
So.
But there are some stats that I'm going to share here in a little bit that aren't quite optimistic, and so we have to start seeing the signs of that. I don't think we've seen that quite yet. It looked like it for just a second there, Shayne.
For a little bit,
Steelers are up 23-7. I know they had the rough start. And Pickett, I mean, let's call it like we see it. I mean, Pickett almost had that pick six to
Marcus Peters. I think it was
Marcus Peters almost had the pick six early in the game.
Yeah,
and that could have been game changing for sure.
That looked like a wrong route. I don't know if for me,
it would look like a miscommunication. Of some
really did.
I don't know if it was an option route or if the receiver thought the play was breaking down and tried to cut it upfield.
Something happened there because
that may not have been on him. It could have been worse than that. But when the Steelers did get out to that 23-7 lead, Shayne, I'm like, can we please just put this team away? I mean, you got some momentum now. You've just had the big plays, and let's just drive that nail in the coffin and be done with it. That wasn't the case, obviously, and they made it a one-score game by the end. But Josh McDaniels didn't really know about that, so we're thankful for that at least, that he decided to kick the field goal instead. Shayne, give us a couple winners and losers from Week 3 for the Steelers.
So one of the winners, I think you have to say, is Calvin Austin right off the bat, finally getting a big play, which is what we're hoping from him, right? I know he's not the biggest winner in the game, but I wanted to shout him out right away because that's the type of play that we need to see from this offense, right? Being able to attack down the field against coverage like that, where you have a free release down the field and you can get split the safeties, right? And Austin is the guy that could do that on this team, right? He's the one guy that you could say, like, yeah, we can send him down the field and he's going to be faster than most guys he's up against, right? And we've seen it with guys like Tank Dell in Houston this year as a rookie, and some other guys around the league that are smaller guys, but they can still make plays down the field, even from the outside if you want them to, because they're just so hard to get your hands on them, right? Like, it's really difficult to press those guys because they could just avoid you with quickness. And I want to see more from Austin while he has this opportunity, because once Deontay comes back, obviously his role is probably going to diminish a little bit. But while he has this opportunity, I want to continue to see him get big play opportunities with this team.
Yeah, and Shayne, I see no reason why Calvin Austin can't do what Tank Dell is doing, why he can't do what Tutu Atwell is doing over with the Rams.
Yeah, he's another guy.
It's about situation and opportunity, and I think that Austin is going to be a quality receiver. Just start getting him involved. He dusted Peters on that play. He just blew him out of the water, stride for stride, just blew right away from him. So start using him in that way more. And like I said, get him in some drags, get him in some slants, allow him to work that way. We're going to talk about what Mike McDaniel does with his receivers here in just a second. But that, I think the Steelers need to, they got to find the best ways to utilize their skill players to the best of their abilities. And I think that getting Austin in space would be one of those ways, Shayne. I think that if I were to point to a winner this game, I'm going to give some props to Kenny Pickett. I was his biggest critic in the first few weeks of this season. I thought the first few games were pretty abysmal. He really stepped that up in week 3 with arguably Shayne, the best game of his career. I mean, set a couple of career milestones, most yards per attempt in a start in his career, 8.4. That is right where that number, I love to see that there every time. Yeah. So first 2 touchdown performance in terms of passing touchdowns in a single game, and his first 100+ pass rating, had 105.8 if I remember off the top of my head here. And so definitely saw more so what we needed to see from him. And that was a good bounce back performance after what we saw in week 2 against the Browns.
Yeah, his performance overall, there's a couple opportunities that were missed, but a lot of it was because of the continued pressure, which we're going to talk more about that as well here in a little bit. But there was a couple moments where he definitely could have had some more yards and maybe some more plays made. But overall, this was his most complete performance, I think, as a passer in quite a while, obviously. You talked about, production-wise, is probably his best game. There's some moments last year where he had better, drives, I would say, but an overall complete game. Getting 2 touchdowns for the first time is, one, a little sad, but also you're glad to see that finally happen with this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. We have somebody chiming in, says, love the show. Thanks so much for that comment. If you guys have any questions and you're joining us here live, go ahead and drop them in the chat. And Shayne and I would love to get to those for you. A couple losers here, Shayne. I mean, I got one coming right to my mind, so I'll let you go first, though.
Yeah. Dan Moore really had a rough game again, and I don't want to keep harping on him, because if you guys, I'll keep plugging it because I want to. But the Curtain Call show that we do on Tuesdays, we talked a lot about Dan Moore. So if you want to really hear us go in about Dan Moore and the decision to keep playing him, you can go check that out. But briefly here, he just isn't it, right? He's not a starting left tackle in the NFL right now. I understand the difficulty level of the players he's faced, the defensive lines he's faced through 3 weeks.
Yeah.
You cannot be this level of bad even in those matchups. You have to be able to do something to help yourself out and help out the offense. And so far, he just frankly hasn't done it. He gets pushed back by power. He can't get in front of speed rushers. Like, there's no part of his game that's working right now. And we're going to talk about a little bit more again when we get to some of the disgusting stats. He's definitely going to be included in that. But at some point, a move has to be made internally. And there's obviously a very clear move that should be made, and we'll talk more about it later.
Yeah, there's a lot of people coming to his defense, Shayne, and obviously that was the guy that I was going to talk about as well.
Yes.
Now, both can be true, okay? So, I mean, this is what I put on Twitter this morning, or X, whatever you want to call it these days.
Who cares? Yeah, whatever.
Dan Moore he's had a tremendously difficult matchups in schedule so far through 3 weeks of the season. At the same time, Dan Moore has performed terribly against this difficult schedule. So both are true. It doesn't excuse his performance, though, just because you're going against very good NFL players. You have to be able to hold up at the point of attack. Just so happens the Steelers drafted the guy that's supposed to be his replacement. Shayne, my initial projection was that Broderick would come in very, very similar to the Kenny taking over for Mitch Trubisky.
Right.
In that 3.5, 4 game stretch, you would see him. Well, we're 3 games in now. There's been no talk really about him coming in. I don't think that I'm going to be right in my assessment. I think the Steelers are going to kind of ride this storm out with Dan Moore now that the hardest stretch of his schedule is already completed. At the same time, I feel like there's no better time than now for Broderick to jump in here, because you've got those very difficult players out of the way. You can kind of get eased into the action. We know Broderick's going to be the guy of the future. At least that is the plan anyway. So, Dan Moore did not have a good game, and it doesn't really matter how you slice it, really. I mean, you can look at it advanced analytics. You can watch the tape and use the eye test. He was just bulldozed, and it wasn't even by Max Crosby, only a couple times. I mean, he still did not hold his own against less than respectable pass rushers at this stage in the NFL. And so need to see more from him. I'm not sure what we're getting out of that at this point.
Yeah.
All right, Shayne.
Go ahead, Tommy, because we do have a comment here.
Yeah.
Again, from Paranormal and Funhouse thing is how you say it. Yeah, I hear Big Ben defending Dan a lot lately. I have heard that too.
Mm.
I feel like a part of that is, that was his left tackle when he left.
Loyalty.
I think
Yeah.
he doesn't want this guy to continue to get crapped on by
Yeah.
everybody. But at the end of the
Mhm.
day, the tape doesn't lie, right? It
Shayne, I
doesn't.
have no doubt that Dan Moore is a nice guy. I
Oh,
mean,
I'm sure he is.
he gives
Absolutely.
he gives off that vibe, I feel like,
Yeah.
and he's done a ton to help Broderick. I was watching him there in Latrobe where he would sit after practice
Mhm.
and help Broderick work on his technique. And so I understand why Ben has come into his defense. It's just really hard to defend him as a starting left tackle right now
It
after
just
what
is.
we've seen.
Yeah, it just is.
Let's talk about Steelers right now and the AFC North. They are in the lead, Shayne, tied with a 2-1 record with the Ravens, but they actually hold that tiebreaker. If the season were to end today, the Pittsburgh Steelers would be hosting a playoff game. Long season left to go, and certainly a lot of time left for this to change. But what's encouraging, I feel like so far, Shayne, is Steelers got probably the two best defenses they'll face all year out of the way. Now they have one more matchup against the Browns, obviously, and which is going to be on the road, unfortunately. But the Browns defense looks legitimate. Like they've allowed one touchdown drive all season long so far. Yeah, I know, and
it's so funny, but yeah.
which is it's almost bizarre. I know. So I think that's the encouraging part there. I don't know if it's going to keep up. How do you see this shaping out right now? If you're just going to look way into the future,
I think it's very important that we finish 3-2 or 4-1 before the bye. If we can we need to win one of these next two games, obviously. Now, I assume the game that's more likely to win is this week coming up, but the Texans have shown a lot of promise. We'll talk more about them. But if you can go 4-1, 3-2 in these first 5 games, considering the strength of the schedule, outside of the Raiders and Texans games, the other 3 games are very tough. So if you can win 2 of those games, ultimately, that's going to be huge. Because after the bye, the schedule picks up sort of. It's not, the defenses we face aren't as tough, but I think the overall schedule is not particularly easy. I'm thinking more about that stretch at the end of the year, because you're probably going to be facing a healthier Bengals team, you assume, a team that's more likely to be able to put up points and deal with our defense better. We'll have to play the Ravens again late, play the Seahawks, I believe, late. Like it's going to be a tough end of season stretch. So putting up wins now, getting ahead of the curve now, opposed to the last couple of years where we start off very slow and then pick it up at the end, it's going to be a lot harder to do that end of season surge this year. Now, I'm not saying they can't, but it's going to be much more important, I think, if they want to get to that like 10 win mark, right, or more, or especially if they do want to try to win this division, which again looks more possible than it did at the start of the year, considering everything that's happening with the Bengals. The Ravens have their own issues with injuries. The Browns are still very streaky offensively. You don't know how well they're going to do, and granted, we can't say much ourselves for that, but it's totally more of a possibility than I thought going into the season, but it really matters how these next 4 or 5 games go, especially.
Yeah, considering the sloppy start they had to the year, Shayne, sign me up for 2-1 because
yes,
I don't know if this team. I mean, they came away victorious. So now I want to say that they don't deserve to be 2-1, but at the same time, it's like I will take that record based on the performances that we've seen so far, and hopefully that it just continues to improve from here. But what's a little bit discouraging is we talk about some of the other teams from around the league, Shayne. The Miami Dolphins put up 70 points this week. They put up 70 points. They won by 50 against the Denver Broncos. I mean, I put that on Twitter. I'm like, how long is it going to take the Steelers to score 70 points in a season? And so you are dealing with such creative minds in the NFL. Mike McDaniel is just an asset for that team, and they've got fast players everywhere. I think he's on to something, Shayne. Just put 4-2 guys everywhere on your team and let them just destroy people after the catch, which is what Miami is doing right now. Tua is a strong MVP candidate, and this team is undefeated. And so I think that I think that the Steelers probably should draw from some of what McDaniel is doing over there and say, hey, how can we incorporate some of this stuff? How can we score not a 70 point, but how can we get back to a 30-point game, Shayne? How can we score 30 offensive points in a game? And I think that needs to just be kind of the milestone that you want to hit right now, at least, and then kind of improve on that from there. But to see what other teams are doing and the success they're having, these top offenses in the league, it does make it a little bit discouraging just knowing just how kind of Steelers flatline after a while, and they're content to just kind of sit on a lead. And so do you have a different thought on that, or what are you thinking?
No, I think it's totally fair to compare the Steelers to some of these top teams because of the fact that, one, we've always been, for the most part, up in that tier of teams. Like, we've been expected to be there. And I think the problem is for a lot of the top offenses in the NFL, especially in the AFC, you have to have one or two of certain things. You have to have a weapon at quarterback, right? So you're looking at the Mahomes of the world, the Herberts, whatever, Burrow when he's healthy, stuff like that. Guys who are truly just elite players at their position. Which again, as much as I do think Kenny can improve and get better, I'm not willing to say he can get up to that level at any point. It just doesn't, scream that type of player for me. But if you don't have that, you have to have super weapons on offense around them, right? You look at the Dolphins. As much as Tua is playing very good, this offense is a well-oiled machine that he does not have to do a lot of difficult things a lot of the time in terms of throws. Now, he has to be better with his pocket presence, which he has this year. He has to be very accurate, which he's always been. His anticipation is huge, but there's so many open windows. And he's just playing point guard out there, and it's great for him. It's a perfect system for him. But because of all the weapons they have, all the speed, it makes his job much easier. The quarterback doesn't have to be the savior of the team. He doesn't have to be this super weapon. If you have one of those two things, you're going to be really good offensively. If you don't have either, play calling is where you have to factor in, right? Now it's about play calling. Now the Dolphins have two of those things, which is great. And the same thing with the Chiefs. They have two of those as well. And you count Kelsey as a super weapon, obviously, tight end. The Steelers have really good weapons, but I don't know if any of them are super weapons. They have a quarterback that I think can be good, but is not a super weapon at quarterback. And we know the play calling isn't good. So they're behind the eight ball kind of in all three levels of that. I think at least the weapons are closer to that level of being able to be a top offense. But again, until the play calling picks up or until Kenny just kind of takes things over himself and starts doing stuff outside of structure more, this offense is going to be limited compared to the Dolphins of the world, the Chiefs, the Chargers, things like that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's a lot of things that have to change. And so let's talk about our first discussion topic for today, Shayne. 3 disgusting stats that the Pittsburgh Steelers must improve. And I'm telling you, these are bad. These are not where you want to be. And again, we're 3 games into the season, so it's not guaranteed to stay this way.
Right.
But we do need to see improvement. I mean, if we don't see improvement, Shayne, by mid-season, I mean, I am all in favor of mid-season firings. I'm in favor of whatever changes you can make, because you cannot progress this slowly or kind of flatline the way that they have right now on the offensive side of the ball and expect any success. Again, the ultimate goal here should not just be, let's keep Mike Tomlin's win streak going. I don't care about that.
It doesn't.
Let's get into the postseason and let's make a run deep into the postseason, because you are an improved team. And if you can't do that, then I don't know what we're playing for. The ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl. And so this is how I view things, Shayne. I'm sure it's how you view things. We want to get back on that Super Bowl route, not just be a competitive team or one that can go 500. And so these things will have to improve. Let's start with the first one, Shayne. The Steelers are 22nd in the NFL in scoring margin right now. And the number that we have here from team rankings, the Steelers are losing by 4.7 points per game. So they're negative 4.7 points per game because of that first blowout loss. And then kind of just squeaking by these last couple of games, winning by 1 score in each. They're actually, they're being outscored by 4.7 points per game 3 games into the season. It's good for 22nd in the league. Shayne, if I look at some of the other top teams here, I mean, Miami is winning by almost 20 points per game, which is no surprise after what we just saw. Buffalo's winning by 18.7. Dallas is winning by 16 per game. San Francisco is winning by 16 per game. Even Cleveland is winning by almost 14 points per game. To get to that level where you can say, yeah, I feel good, I feel like we can be a Super Bowl contender, you can't have a negative scoring margin. You just can't do that. Your point differential has to be in the positive. This is why we knew last year that the Minnesota Vikings were such a fraudulent team. Shayne, they finished with a negative in the scoring margin, just a little bit in the negative, but it just showed how average they were at the end of the day. And their wins were great. I mean, the record was great. It just didn't matter. They weren't fooling anybody, because you could see that if you're just not comfortably winning some of these games, then you're not on par with those very top teams.
Yeah, I think the problem right now for the Steelers is every game they play, the other team, rightfully so, believes they have a chance to win, because they know they're not going to probably get blown out. They're not going to get down 20 points early. They're not going to have to deal with, trying to come back from a ton of points down, because this team, when they lose, they either lose very close, or in the 49ers case, they're just better than us and they really whooped us week 1, or we win close, right? This is not a team that blows people out. And you don't have to blow people out, but if you're going to win by one score consistently, that's not a way to sustain success in the NFL.
Mhm.
Like you said, you talked about the Vikings last year. I was on that train the entire year. I'm like, this team is a good football team, but they're not a
Yeah.
13-4 football team. And
Yeah,
we
for
saw
sure.
it in the playoffs when they had to face a Giants team that also was kind of fraudulent to a certain degree as well, but they just won the
Mhm.
day. Because again, if you play the Vikings, as they found out this year, you're always in it because that offense might score 30 points, but you can score 31. That's kind of the end game with that.
Yeah.
Now for the Steelers, it's more so that our offense cannot put teams away, and our
Mhm.
defense can usually keep them from coming back, but it's still very much a razor edge when it comes to that stuff. And so our point differential probably is going to remain negative for a couple games, even if we win these next 2 or 3 games.
Mhm.
It's going to take a bit to get that point differential up because we're probably not going to beat teams by 10, 12, 14 points.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, Shayne, it's got to be in the positive. Like if you get into the playoffs in a situation like the Vikings, and you're
Yeah,
going in there with a negative point differential,
it's a
you are
coin
one
flip
and done.
at
You
best.
are.
Yeah.
I mean, even the Atlanta Falcons right now, the New Orleans Saints, the Indianapolis Colts, the Arizona Cardinals, Shayne, have a positive point differential, and the Steelers do not. This is
Yeah, it's not
it's
great.
I know it's something that has to improve, and I don't think it's a stat. It's again, these are some of these more stats that we don't look at as common as like some of these box score numbers or anything,
Right.
but it's so important. And
It
I
is.
think that you
It
can
is.
argue at the end of the day. I mean, when you go in year by year, Shannon, you look at point differential from top to bottom, you typically get an order of the best teams in fairly close to order that how you would say these are the best teams in the league, and at the bottom of the list, these are the worst teams in the league.
Yeah.
So they have to avoid that. Now, fortunately, they're not negative 19.7 points per game margin like the Chicago Bears right now, because I'm just appalled at what's going on over there after their investments they made in the offense. But at least they got Chase Claypool, so
Oh, yeah, at
they
least
got
have
that going
Chase.
for him,
They
Shayne, right
got
now.
Chase. They're good. Yeah, they're fine.
I will move on from this one. If you get a chance to go look at that, these are on team rankings.
Yep.
The next one, Shayne, is the Steelers are 30th in EPA. 30th in EPA. Expected points added is what EPA is. If you're not familiar with that stat, it's an advanced stat. And again, this typically lines up very, very well. By the end of the season, the teams on the top are really, really dominant football teams, and the teams on the bottom are really atrocious teams. It's not encouraging at all that the Steelers are 30th in EPA right now on the season entering week 4, considering the only two teams that they are higher than, Shayne, the Bears, who I just mentioned, are losing by almost 20 points a game, and the Jets, who are losing by 6.5 points a game.
Yeah,
It's
actual NFL quarterback playing for them. So
yeah, and no, they certainly do not. And so that's it. I mean, they are lower in EPA than every other team. And Shayne, I posted a graphic on Twitter last week, and I kind of showed just how far below these other teams the Steelers are sitting right now. This is a coordinator issue. When your run EPA and your pass EPA are both among the very worst in the NFL, you've got play calling issues. And we know that, like we said, the roster should be improved on paper, right?
yes.
You went out and made moves for in the past 2 years. Their EPA is worse than it was in 2021, and they made moves to get guys like you got Isaac Seumalo and James Daniels and Mason Cole. You drafted Calvin Austin, you drafted George Pickens. You've got Freiermuth now in year 3, and you got Kenny Pickett. And so you would assume that the talent level is higher. We're not seeing the fruits of that. We're not seeing the results. And I think that it stems from the play calling side of things because, again, your run and your pass EPA are both among the very worst in the league.
Yeah, and when you look at it in depth, like the reason why we're so low in EPA is because we have relied heavily on splash plays, right? Defensively, even especially in the passing game so far, we've had some big plays. Kenny's had some long touchdowns. He actually has 2 of the longer touchdowns all year. It's just again, that's almost it, right? There's no consistency down to down. And when you're looking at an EPA, it is a pretty correlative stat. It is pretty good at determining things like that. It's you build it up over time. It's not just, what your results are total. It's how you get there. It's what you look like in the process of getting there. So in a stat like that, we're not going to look great because you look at the Browns game, we get 2 defensive touchdowns that saved the game, right? Like that's not normal. It just isn't sustainable, right? And then against the Raiders, we give up however many passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Garoppolo. We get 3 interceptions, 2 of which were him just throwing it up, and another one where he got pressured and Wallace comes away with the pick. Like it's these splash plays that are making this team survive. And until they can more consistently just win down to down, drive to drive, this stat's going to continue to paint us in a bad light, and rightfully so, because you can't sustain winning like this, right? That you just can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not going to cut it, Shayne. I mean, if you were to squeak in like this somehow, I mean, your offense is just not going to have enough firepower. But I mean, the eye test tells that as well. But this is just one more advanced stat to kind of show you where the Steelers are in respect to the rest of the league right now. Like, there are teams that are tiers higher. Like the Dolphins are in tier of their own above the league right now.
Right.
And there's multiple tiers between them and where the Steelers are. And they're fractions away from actually being the worst. They're fractions away from their EPA actually being as bad as the Chicago Bears, who are losing by almost 20 points a game, Shayne. So that kind of shows you on a play-by-play basis how inefficient the Steelers have been this season. All right, let's get to that third stat here. The Steelers are 32nd in the NFL in pass blocking grade as a unit, according to Pro Football Focus. I mean, it's not surprising when you look at how the line has held up or hasn't held up so far for the first 3 games. Their grade on the season, Shayne, is a 28.7 in terms of their pass protection. It's the lowest by a pretty wide margin in the NFL. And it's something that can't continue. I mean, I do feel bad for Pickett. Like, I don't think Pickett played well in the first 2 games, but I felt like he played about as well as he could have this past week, considering how poorly that offensive line held up with only Max Crosby to account for, really.
Well,
I mean, that's
as
the
far
one
as
guy.
Established players, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a collection of things here. There is a talent issue at the offensive tackle position right now for the Steelers. I don't think that Mason Cole is playing well at all either. I think the guards are playing just average. But at the same time, Shayne, when you are running into 9-man boxes and you've got 6 guys blocking, how do you expect things to turn out? I mean, that's the running side of things. When in terms of pass protection, though, it's the same way. If you have a guy coming off the edge blitzing, and the Steelers have a hat on a hat, they should be able to do better than what they've done so far. And the results just have not been there at all. And so a lot of factors that go into this. I think that Steelers do need to do a better job helping out where the weaknesses are in their offensive line and in a matchup by matchup basis. But at the same time, Shayne, like I said, they do have a guy on the bench. I'm ready to turn to him at this point. I think it would at least help some. And hopefully, now that you're past, like I said, that really rough stretch of those first 2 games of defense, you can get going in the right direction. It just still, even this performance against the Raiders and their lackluster defense, I just didn't see what I was looking for.
Yeah, and the most discouraging thing about it is the fact that, again, no one on this line is playing above or even at their talent level realistically. Like, Dan Moore is talented enough to not be getting beat this badly. Okorafor is a veteran.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be getting beat as badly as he is at times. The guards have played, like you said, average, but we expected more from them, especially James Daniels, who's in his second year with the team, right? And Cole, we knew that he was kind of going to be an average center at best, no matter what. So him playing poorly isn't a huge shock. But again, like, it's just so hard to play quarterback, especially with this type of pass protection. It just is. And even if you don't think it's as bad as PFF is grading it, which, again, their grades are iffy, but I think from what I've seen, the eye test points to this being the case.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really hard to go out there every drive and expect to see consistent success and getting first downs consistently with a pass blocking like this. Like, you're going to have the big plays like we've seen, because sometimes, lightning strikes twice or whatever. But at the same time, this is what we go back to the EPA stat, right? This is why our EPA is so low, because we can't consistently sustain drives. And sustaining drives is how you win games in the NFL. I'm sorry. Like, if you're not going to score a ton of points on big plays constantly, like the Dolphins or the Chiefs or whatever, you have to sustain drives. You have to be able to run the football on top of pass protecting, like you talked about. And we're not doing really any of those things well right now.
Yeah, we need to see a pocket. I mean, it has to improve, because right now there's just not enough time to operate how the Steelers need to in terms of their offensive efficiency. You can't find things very often when Pickett's getting smashed as he delivers the football. And so the eye test matches that like I said, we always go back and watch these games. I've watched every game at least 2 or 3 times now. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And it's not just one guy. I think that Dan Moore has been the worst of the group, but it's not just one guy. The Mason Cole's getting pushed in as well. And Okorafor hasn't exactly done a bang up job in his role either. And so that we need change. I don't know exactly what that's going to be, Shayne, but let's talk about this. How can the Steelers improve in these areas? We just pointed out 3 incredibly concerning advanced stats for the Steelers offense. through only 3 games this season, but it's got to start trending in the right direction. What are the steps that you would take? What's the first thing that you would do to kind of vault this forward in the right direction?
Yeah, I'll focus on the second and third stats, because the first stat kind of is going to come along with these ones, right? Because for you to get better in scoring margin, you have to be, just a better football team, and fixing those two are going to do that. So I think the first thing that needs to happen, especially, we know it's not going to happen beforehand, so I'll just talk about post Texans game. If Dan Moore cannot hold up against the Texans front, if he looks not just as bad, because he probably won't look as bad, but if he can't hold up at the point of attack, if he can't help in the run game, if he's getting dusted by their pass rushers, no offense to the guys over there, like Will Anderson Jr. is a really good prospect we're hoping to see do well and all that stuff. But if he can't hold up at least adequately against this Texans front, Jones has to be inserted next week. Like in week 5, he has to be. Even if it's against the Ravens, who cares? Like, he needs to play. That's the first thing. As far as the other pass blocking stuff, there's not much you can do except for hoping that the guards especially pick up eventually. Like Cole, I'm expecting to kind of just be what he is. Like, he's a starting center, but not a great one. The guards have to improve to help give Kenny somewhere to go, because I think it's part of the problem too, is he's having to escape the pocket outside, and then the rushers are coming off the edge, and they're not sealing them off, so he's not having rushing lanes. If you give him somewhere to step up, hopefully some of that poise we saw and the pocket presence we saw in the preseason and camp can start to kind of get back to that a little bit there. That's going to be really important. And then as far as the EPA goes, getting up there, that's also how you do that. You have to block better, because blocking is the main thing that this team is not doing well at all. And any front, whether it's run, pass, whatever, you can't consistently sustain drives without being able to get the 4 or 5 yard run on first down, without getting the short completion that Kenny has free lane to be able to do that with. Allow him to run as well, because there's times where he's been able to pick up, third downs with his legs that we didn't see in the Raiders game. He was able to do it, well, technically twice, but it got called back the second time. But again, like, that type of stuff is how you're going to be able to sustain drives. Until the pass blocking and the run blocking improve, you're going to have to keep relying on big plays most of the time.
Yeah, I know that's unfortunate, and hopefully that can all come in time. In defense of that first stat here, though, and what Steelers need to do, the points per game, I think there are opportunities, Shayne, if the Steelers kind of just sit on that lead, and that you can tell the kind of the shift in the mentality once you get that lead. They play a little bit more lax on defense. They're kind of running the ball twice, a conservative pass on third down. Yeah, you're playing not to lose the game. That's not what a lot of these offensive-minded coaches do these days, though. They play the analytics game, Shayne. They'll go for it on their own 30-yard line sometimes, because that's what the analytics tell them to do. They have trust in their offense. Now, obviously, there's not a lot of reason to trust the Steelers offense at this point, but I would like to see them be more aggressive. They've been the least aggressive team in football for several years now in terms of going for it on fourth down. And so and it's not just that, but it's a collection of things, but try to pour it on. Like I said, when you get up 23-7, try to play the same way you've been playing that got you to that lead in the first place. Don't go back to the conservative game plan that's, we're just going to try to milk the clock. You know what can happen. Teams are good. They can fight back in. So let's hope that we see those improvements, and maybe we can revisit these stats a little bit later in the season, Shayne, and kind of chart that improvement from week 4 until now. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. Shayne and I will try to bring you coverage every single week. We're going to do 2 shows, and this one will be live every single Wednesday at 1:30. So make sure you are here with us and jump in the live chat and ask your questions. All right, Shayne, let's talk about Steelers versus Texans. We're going to preview the biggest things to watch for in week 4. Let's start off, though, with the odds this week. Shayne, good news. The Steelers are favored in a football game for the first time this season. It is a road game, and they're only favored by 3 points, but they are favored against the Houston Texans. Now, Texans are coming off a decent game of their own, and they just won 37-17 against the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence when they were playing on the road. And so this is not an ice-cold team that they're heading into right now. They're coming off of a big win, and C.J. Stroud has looked pretty solid for the most part.
Yeah, you can honestly make an argument that Stroud has played at a top 15-ish, if not better level so far through 3
Yeah, I mean, he's
starts in his
taking care of the
career.
ball at least. So
Yeah, his anticipation, I've shouted him out a couple times, but if you guys ever want to watch quarterback plays, see who's playing well, who's not, go check out the quarterback school on YouTube with JT O'Sullivan, former NFL quarterback, does awesome breakdowns, and he raves about Stroud because the thing, excuse me, that he does that most rookies just cannot do at this point in their career, because it's not really fair to ask them to, is he knows exactly where his receivers are going to be. He knows exactly where he wants to put the ball, and he's throwing the ball on time. And for me, that's my biggest concern with this game. The line of us being, +3 essentially, or -3 favorites. I get it
mhm.
because, again, the Steelers are the better team theoretically, but this Texans team is not the pushover that they looked like in game one, and then really that we expected them to be this year. Not only because of Stroud, but because the defense has played relatively well, especially last week. D'Amico Ryans has these guys playing really hard and they're playing smart. It's not going to be an
Mhm.
matchup, especially going on the road. Even if it was at home, this is not something that the Steelers can overlook.
Yeah, I mean, the Texans are young, they are banged up, and you still can't take them lightly, though, because they're
Nope.
coming off of a big win against a playoff team from last year. And so you got to give them the respect that they deserve here, and you got to come in like you're playing a playoff caliber team. I mean, I think that needs to be your mentality. Hopefully, the Steelers are well prepared for this game. The over under for this game is set at 42 points. That seems pretty fair considering
Yeah.
the low scoring games that the Steelers have had so far this season. We would expect their defense to stay in control for the most part. I think a lot of this, again, comes down to the offensive side of things. And can you put up 23, 26
Mhm.
points to maybe secure that win? Or is it going to be one where you're scoring in the teens and you must rely on your defense to get some takeaways and to really slow down Stroud and company? And so we're going to give our game predictions here in just a second. Let's talk about some of the matchups to watch this week. Shayne, Steelers versus Texans. And I'll kick it off with
An
the
old
Steelers
friend.
defensive line against our old friend Kendrick Green. We shipped off Kendrick Green a little bit ago. Now, I haven't heard confirmation yet. I know Green isn't supposed to be a starter for them, Shane,
No,
but
no,
they've
he's
had
not.
so many injuries along
Yeah,
that offensive
like
line
4 or
that
5, I think, or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, they've been decimated there, and so Green has been forced into action. It's gone about as well as you probably would expect it from Kendrick Green at this point. Not a great sample of play. I would have loved nothing more, and I said it at the time when this matchup came up. This was way before
For him to
Cam
be
got injured.
playing, yeah.
I would love to see Cam just long arm Kendrick Green back into the quarterback every play. Unfortunately, Cam's on IR. We won't see him until maybe halfway through the season. And if Kendrick Green does play and start in this game, Shame, he's going to be going against Keanu Benton a lot, who was playing a lot of that role, kind of took over for Cam here, Hayward there in that role. And we saw him have a beautiful long arm against the Texans this past week. There's no doubt in my mind he can do it to Kendrick Green as well. You can swim past him, you can run through him. So I'll be interested to watch that matchup if he is deployed this week. So
Yeah, if he's starting, which it does seem like he is at this point,
mhm.
again, I think he's going to have to play just based on what I've seen. Yeah, Keanu Benson, I know he's not Hayward, but he can get the job done against Kendrick Green. I think we were pretty confident about that. Benton, obviously, I'm not going to keep saying about it, but obviously a favorite of mine in the draft for a lot of reasons. But
Mhm.
what we've seen from him so far is super encouraging as a rookie. I expected this from him. I will say this is not something that I'm surprised by, but it's still nice to see it come to fruition. Unfortunately, partly due to Cam Hayward getting hurt. Definitely didn't want to see that, but it's good to see him out there playing really well. So I do think we have the edge, especially with the injuries
Mhm.
now. They held up really well overall against the Jaguars, but their pass rush has been anemic to say the least. Trayvon Walker's been, I'm not going to call him a bust because he's in year 2, but he's not performing very well as a true edge rusher, which I kind of
Yeah.
expected. Josh Allen has had good amount of sacks, but a lot of them were not clean up even necessarily, but just kind of chasing the quarterback down outside the pocket, similar to TJ, but not quite as dominant as TJ's been, obviously. And I think a lot of it comes down to that unit, even though they're banged up, playing well, it doesn't mean much when you now have to play the Steelers defensive line, right? Like it's just really
Yeah.
is not the same deal. It's going to be very hard for them to hold up against this group. So
Yeah, no, the Steelers are going to be a different kind of animal there. I
yeah,
feel like so. You have to account for them. I mean, you could make the case, Shane, for sure that Watt and Highsmith are the 2 best players on the team right now. I think that
yeah, you make the
you
argument.
can make the case for Highsmith over Minka just 3 games into the season. We know that Minka is still an all-pro caliber safety, and with no Cam right now. So then the Steelers are strong there. I mean, it's one of the better edge duos in the league for sure. So something to watch out for. Let's talk about that in just a little bit. Steelers cornerbacks against Nico Collins this week. Nico Collins is not a name, Shayne, that I would have expected that we would had to really game plan against at this point. But the guy has been uber efficient, and the connection with CJ Stroud through 3 games has been remarkable. I mean, he's almost averaging 90 yards a game. I think it's 86.6. Nico Collins is averaging 11.3 yards per target, which if you were able to do that for the full length of a season, that'll probably be the best in the league. It would be in a lot of years. And so it's remarkable. The efficient start that Nico has had with the Texans is part of the reason why their passing game is starting to come alive here. So they scored 37 points last week. One was on a kind of a wacky return.
Oh, fullback touchdown. Fullback one touchdown. Shout out.
So you don't see that very often. So I'll take a little bit away from that offense there.
Yeah.
But Nico has been really good. And you know who hasn't been exceptional in terms of sticky coverage is Levi Wallace on wide receivers. Now Wallace had the 2 picks last week, and so I don't want to rat on him too hard. Takeaways are very important. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the Steelers just allowed 172 yards and 2 touchdowns to Devontae Adams. Now Adams is obviously a better receiver than Collins. Nobody's going to argue that. But Collins has been so efficient to this point, and the Texans offense is coming alive here. The Steelers cannot take this lightly. They're going to have to make sure that they account for him and where he is on the field.
Yeah, and whenever CJ Stroud was drafted to the Texans, a lot of people were talking about the lack of weapons and is he going to be able to translate well because of Ohio State being just a receiver factory. And I remember talking about it on a couple other shows I did for like around the draft time, and I was like, I don't know if you want to discount Nico Collins. And they also added obviously Tank Dell, who we have to deal with too.
Yeah,
like, I like a lot of what I saw from him last year, especially just considering the offense that he played in. And so far, he's lived up more than that expectation for me, right? Like, I really think he's a good player, and he's showing that right now with Stroud. Great combo so far. Like, you could tell that they're very synced up right now. Like, they know where each other's thinking and what they're doing there. So I'm definitely concerned about this because, again, Levi Wallace, he can't run with anybody. He just can't. I'm sorry. Like, that's just what the reality of it is. So if they get him on these in-breaking routes that they've hit multiple times so far, if they get the ability to cross his face, he's not going to win those matchups. He's just not. It's not going to happen. So they have to get pressure. They have to get Stroud off a spot so he can't just sit back there and throw with anticipation because there's going to be passing windows in the secondary. It just is. And Tank Dell concerns me too because I don't know who you put on him. Like, I don't know what the strategy is other than just keeping someone over the top so he can't do what he did to the Jaguars last week and go for a long touchdown. Like, he's just a load to deal with. And it's similar to Calvin, right? And we talked about a similar player to him where you can't really press him because he's too quick off the line, but you can't also play zone coverage because he's so fast. He can just kind of rip through your zone and get to a spot. Like, it's really hard to deal with players like that if they actually work out and can catch the football like Tank Dell can. It's not a great matchup for us. It really isn't. It's my number one concern, honestly.
Yeah, Shayne, in some weird way, it's kind of like you're going against Pickens and Calvin Austin a little bit
this
week. Because
a little bit,
they mirror each other in a lot of ways. Like, Nico is that big receiver who can just pull down anything, really. And the guy's on pace for well over 1,000 yards.
Yeah,
it's only 3 games in the season, but it's definitely having a breakout year in year 3. And then Tank Dell being that tiny receiver, but so shifty and such a natural football player that you're going to have to count for him as well. So Steelers cornerbacks, they do get another test. It's kind of a sneaky, good competition that you're going against this week. It's not like that elite receiver. But it's still one that I mean, I would not be surprised, Shayne, if the Texans had a 300-yard passing game against the Steelers defense and their cornerbacks were kind of shaking our head at their performance. I don't want that to be the case. But they have the ability to do that, and they've kind of shown that a little bit early on. Let's talk about TJ Watt this week. It's another favorable matchup. You get George Fant, so the backup right tackle with Titus Howard on IR. So he escapes Howard here. Now, Fant has played pretty well. In
he's
Howard's
a veteran.
absence.
He's good.
Yeah, he's veteran guy in his early 30s, and so has a ton of experience under his belts. The edge is always going to go to TJ Watt. And I don't know if it matters what tackle you're going against. Maybe like a Lane Johnson or something that way.
There's not many guys on the right side that are going to be favored.
And even Lane Johnson said that even though I believe they've only played each other one time in their career, Lane Johnson still called TJ Watt one of the best players that he's ever gone up against. And so that's the respect level that he gets even from an all-pro offensive tackle who is out of division, out of conference. They play him once every 4 years. So that just kind of shows you how well respected he is around the league. Watt should be able to dominate George Fant, I think. But again, the game plan all season long for other teams, Shayne, has been, we're going to have a chip on Watt. We're going to make sure that the right tackle's job is a little bit easier. We're going to slow him down off of that initial get off. But I have a feeling that Watt is still going to get his.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if he does not win this matchup pretty handily. And that's no disrespect to George Fant. Like you said, he is a veteran. He's a guy that he totally could have a solid day and not let Watt blow up the offense. But it's going to probably be necessary if the Texans do want to do to us what I think they could do in the passing game. It's going to take them blocking TJ much better than anyone's done so far.
Yeah, they're definitely have to be accountable for him, which teams are well aware. They know of number 90 over there for the Steelers. But on the opposite side, Shayne, you have Alex Highsmith, who again is, I think, having the best start to his NFL career. And I've told people this during the offseason. I'm like, because they question the contract. I'm like, please listen. It's very, very possible for Highsmith to be a better football player
and not
get 14 sacks, right?
14 sacks.
He could have 9 or 10 sacks and still be a better overall player than he is in terms of getting pressures, making splash plays, and just the consistency of everything. And I think that he has grown. I think that he's been awesome these first 3 weeks, and it's not against the easiest matchups either. Like last week, you had Colton Miller, one of the best pass protectors in the league. In week 1, you had Trent Williams, who is the best left tackle in the league for my money. And so now it looks like Laramie Tunsil is kind of on the fence. He's been injured a lot already this year, but I think that he's going to play. I want to speculate what's happening there. Have you heard an update?
He was questionable. He was questionable last week and was doing limited practice. So I imagine that he's probably in line to be able to play, but it's going to come down to like whether the knee feels good enough, because I know it's a knee injury. So I think we can probably say that he's going to try to go at least. Now, it doesn't mean he's going to play particularly well if the knee's bothering him or if he's going to play the whole game, but I have a feeling, especially against this pass rush, if he's able to play, they're probably going to ask him to go out there. So,
yeah, and if you guys end up watching the show later on in the week, remember that we record this on a Wednesday afternoon before those initial injury reports come out. So once they do, we'll have a much better picture of that. But that will be a test for him for Highsmith as well. If one of the best left tackles in Tunsil is out there this week, even if he is coming back from an injury. There's one more I want to talk about, Shayne, and these two are not going head to head physically against each other, but Kenny Pickett versus CJ Stroud. This is going to be maybe the biggest topic this in this game for the Steelers versus Texans this week in week 4, because you have 2 young quarterbacks. You've got the first quarterback taken in 2022, and you've got the second overall pick in 2023. How are these guys going to fare against each other? There was a lot of talk among the Steelers fan base, and Steeler Nation was kind of split in terms of, yes, we should take a quarterback in 2022. No, we should wait and hold off until the 2023 class where you can trade up for a CJ Stroud or an Anthony Richardson or someone like that. They obviously chose to do the former. They took Pickett last year. Things have been a little bit of a roller coaster ride so far. Stroud has obviously had a pretty good start to his career, 4 passing touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and they're coming off of a big win over the Jaguars. And so this is going to be a big topic for this week's game. Which one of these quarterbacks do you think comes out and looks like the better player this week?
I think that my hope is that it comes down to whose offensive line holds up better. Because I do think that with Stroud, he is a guy that, even though it's better than it was early in his career at Ohio State, he's still very much affected by pressure more so than a lot of other quarterbacks are. And that's something that's going to probably continue to get better. It's already gotten better. Even this year to start off, it hasn't been too bad, but he is a guy that he's not exactly the most creative playmaker with the football. He's very much more of a drop back with anticipation, throw off your drop, which is great for the Texans. Like that, they have not had a player do that really probably since early Schaub, because like even Watson was more of a playmaker, and that's great in the NFL nowadays. But like with an offense like this, with a team like this, getting consistency from the quarterback position and knowing what to expect is a really nice feeling, I think, for this team, right? And like I think the creativity will come more with time, but if he's pressured the way that he could be in this game, especially with his backup offensive line, it's going to be really hard for him to make plays consistently, because unless the guys are just really crisp with their routes and getting out in like 2 seconds and they can get the ball out quickly, it could get ugly pretty quickly, because, again, the Steelers do really well against rookie quarterbacks. Now, most guys don't look like Stroud through 3 games, so that might be part of it. But at the same time, I think Kenny, if he can get some protection, he's probably going to look better. And I think that right now, considering he's not a rookie and Stroud is, he probably is better to a certain degree. But it's really, I think, going to come down to kind of factors they can't really control.
Yeah, you said it with the pressure. I mean, it really comes down to that because I like Watt and Highsmith as much as any team we're going to go against in terms of a pass rush tandem. The problem is on the opposite side of the football for us, Shayne, we've got two tackles that are very, very likely the worst in the league. I mean, as you can, if you have a case for another team right now that has a worse pairing of tackles, I would love to hear about that because I think that they've been pretty awful so far. And so it kind of negates a little bit what Watt and Highsmith are able to do, just knowing that, okay, the other team is automatically going to look better with their pass rushers because the Steelers tackles are so poor on the other side. So we'd like to see them hold up. Hopefully they can get a good game going here for the first time. And so I know that Will Anderson's over there. He's had a pretty strong start to his career so far, Shayne, and he's mostly been rushing from the left side. So that's going to be a test for Okorafor, probably more so than Dan Moore. But we'll see if he can kind of rise up to that challenge as well. I want to see a strong performance by the offensive line because that's something we haven't seen yet. Having said that, it's really hard to say until we see how that line holds up. It's really hard to say between Stroud and Pickett, who's going to have the better game here. I would like to think that it's Pickett. I think that Pickett, like I said, is coming off of one of his best performances so far. But again, Stroud also looked good last week as well. Shayne, let's talk about our keys to the game here before we give our final score predictions. Let's start with the offensive side of the football. What do the Steelers need to do on offense to come away with their third straight win?
Hopefully finally block somebody, Tommy. That's the end all be all of this, right? And until they block somebody, which again they haven't done yet, this is the key to success because everything else that Canada wants to do is whether it's good, bad, indifferent, whatever you feel about it, none of it matters if nobody blocks, right? Like his run game, we don't know if we like it, but it certainly doesn't matter because they can't block it. We don't like the passing concepts, but even if they are open, what's the point if Kenny can't find them because he's getting sacked? Like at the end of the day, like playing offensive football it always starts with the trenches, no matter what anybody tells you, unless you're Mike McDaniel, who his offensive line is playing better than it should anyway. But then on top of that, he can basically make them not matter. Your offensive line matters more than anything else ultimately, because you have to be able to block for the skill players. You have to be able to block for the quarterback. Right now, we're not doing that. So until we do, that's the only key that I really care about. Everything else, we can start to figure out like what things they really, truly need to do better. I do think play action, continuing that train from last week where they actually did throw a couple play action plays in there, that has to continue because, again, that just helps you move pockets. It helps you with the offensive line protect. They're not going to be teeing off as much if they have to worry about that play fake. So that can be helpful in this game specifically, but overall, they just need to block people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big one there. Obviously, we hit on that a lot this show already.
Yeah.
You mentioned play action. I think that's important too. Keep up with that because the Steelers Pickett had 135 passer rating on play action this past week. Yeah, and you can just see. I went back and watched those. Seeing the linebackers get sucked in, seeing the edge players freeze a little bit, not knowing if it's a run or pass.
It just gives them a little bit more time, just a little bit.
Yeah, it forces the defense to stay accountable too. You can't just tee off on the quarterback, and you don't want to tip your hat. Like we said, we is very clear and defined. And so I think that's one thing, Shayne, one of the keys that the Steelers have to come away with this week is please just don't make what you are doing so predictable to the other team, where if you have Miles Boykin out there on the field, you're probably running the football. If you're under center, throw some play action in there. So, but my biggest key, Shayne, apart from the offensive line that you've already mentioned, offensively, I think the Steelers need to start having more plays designed to get the ball, get players the ball in space. Excuse me.
Yes.
Because I think that's where they're really, really going to thrive. I know that Austin was awesome on that down the field play, biggest play of his career so far, obviously. But get the guy in a drag route, get some slants going here. This is what these teams do. It's why they can just burn after the catch. You can aid your quarterback so greatly with these types of plays. And we all know that Steelers were last in the league in yards after the catch last year. Because they like to throw the sidelines, because they like to throw the curls and comebacks and out routes. Those have such a limited upside, Shayne, that you really need. You have to have stuff that your playmakers can make plays in space after the catch. It's such a big part of today's game. So I'd like to see that continue to trend in the right direction. I think we saw a little bit more of that in the Raiders game. We need to see that magnified again this week against the Texans. Defensively, what is the key to stopping CJ Stroud in the Texans?
Well, I think we can just go ahead and point at our two best players on defense, like you said already, right? It's going to come down to the pass rush. This secondary is not guarding anybody on the perimeter right now, and I think a big thing that's unfortunate about that is Minka. We talked about him earlier. Like, he just doesn't have the ability to make plays right now because teams don't have to throw down the field at him. They don't have to make decisions based on him at all. They can kind of almost take him out of a lot of plays because, yeah, well, Levi Wallace is guarding my receiver, so I'm just going to throw to him, or Patrick Peterson is looking the other way or like backing up and not being able to make plays. I'm just going to throw his way. Like, it's just not very hard to avoid the best player in the secondary for the Steelers right now. And that's one of the problems with safety is, as great as Minka is, sometimes you can take him out of a game by simply just deciding, you know what, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I don't need to test him. I don't care. He can come up and make tackles and, be the tackling leader. That's fine. We'll live with that. So you have to be able to get a pass rush home because that's going to give your corners a chance to make some plays on the ball like they did against the Raiders, right? It's not like they were making these unbelievable plays on the ball. They were getting pressure and then allowing the ball to come out weird or just not on time, whatever it may be. That's going to be the key because if you don't do that, especially from what we've seen from Stroud, he could very easily dice the secondary up. It's sad, but it's true. That's just kind of where it's at.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a reason why pass rushers get paid so much money, right? Because they impact the game so greatly. I think that you can argue, Shane, you can make a legitimate case that after quarterback, your edge defenders are the most important players to your team because how fast you can get pressure on the opposing team limits so much of what they can do on offense. Part of the reason why the Steelers defense has been just outstanding with TJ Watt here since 2019 in those few years where they were near the top of the league in defense and DVOA. So we'd like to see that trend continue again now with a healthy TJ Watt this year, even if Hayward is not back until the second half of the season. So I agree with that. I think my defensive key, Shane, if I don't point to the same thing as you, because I think we would mirror each other on a lot of these things, especially in this particular matchup.
Yeah.
But I think that the cornerbacks have to be better this game. Now, I know that Wallace and Patrick Peterson combined for 3 picks last week, which was awesome. It makes you wonder, does the game go a little bit differently? Now, the last one didn't impact the game at all.
Yeah, it was just throwing it up. Yeah, Jimmy.
So, but the game might have gone a little bit differently because the corners, I didn't think, especially Levi Wallace, and we've talked about him a lot too. He's kind of the Broderick Jones of the defense right now for the Steelers. If he's not getting those picks, the sample play looks really poor outside of that because you are surrendering so many. I mean, he's given up over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, and we're only 3 games into the season, Shane. And great. So he's on the pace to have statistically and analytically just a really, really bad season from an NFL starting cornerback. And so obviously we'd like to see that permanent switch to Joey Porter at some point. I don't think we're getting it this early on, especially not with Wallace coming off a 2-pick performance. But if Wallace and Peterson are going to be out there and they're going to be one of the slower cornerback tandems in the league, they have to be better on a play-to-play basis than what they have been in these first 3 weeks. Otherwise, it just makes it too easy for quarterbacks to pick them apart. And as long as quarterbacks are making good decisions, I mean, your good decision as a quarterback is probably going to be, I'm going to look where Levi Wallace is.
Target Levi
Wallace. And I'm going to go to him often. And I'm going to trust that he's not in a good enough position to make a play on the ball because he does have some ball skills, but there's only been a couple of those opportunities because he's typically a few steps behind Shane. So I do think the cornerback play needs to ramp up like crazy here in the near future. So that is my key for the Steelers defense. Shane and I are going to give our game predictions before we sign off here for today. Shane, what do you have? Steelers versus Texans week 4. Steelers can advance their win streak to 3 in a row. Do you think it's going to happen this week?
I do still think it's going to happen. I know we talked a lot about good things for the Texans and not so great things for the Steelers, but we're just trying to be honest about it, right? Like, we know that this team is not a team that's going to be able to probably go into someone else's house and beat them handily. Like, it's just not the type of team that we are right now. But I do trust Mike Tomlin against a rookie quarterback. I do trust his pass rush against the depleted offensive line for them. So I'm going to give the Steelers a little bit of an edge. I'm going to say 24-20 is going to be my prediction, slightly over if you guys are looking at the over-under there. I do think the offense can get things going against this defense as long as the pass blocking is a little better, which, again, if it's not, fire everybody on the put everybody that's off the bench and put them in we need to do something. That's just kind of what it is. But I think they can at least get to 24 points, and that should be enough.
That would be a statement, wouldn't it, Shayne, to bench your entire offensive
everyone,
line?
you're done.
Second
I know we
unit,
don't even have 5 guys on the bench right now, but you're all going off. We'll play
put Darnell in as another tackle or something.
Maybe.
So,
hey, maybe.
No, I definitely get where you're coming from. I do want to point out that it's been kind of weird week for the Steelers.
Yeah.
Like historically. So this past week, they obviously played a Sunday night game. It's a bit of a short week. So going from Las Vegas, the other side of the country, you have the stop in Kansas City, Shayne. So you kind of spend a day or half a day there. Then you get back home to Pittsburgh. You're there for like 2 days and you go back to Houston now, which again is the Steelers traveled the shortest distance of any team in the NFL last year. And now already in back-to-back games, I mean, you could have a little bit of jet lag. I'm not making excuses for Pittsburgh, but it could be a bit of an exhausting week because of what they've experienced so far.
This feels like one of those games, real quick, Tom. That feels like one of the games the Steelers would lose, doesn't it? Like this feels like a game that
seems like that.
Out.
It seems like one of those ones where they kind of just show up a little bit lackadaisical.
Very well could be. Yeah.
And again, I'm not excusing the Steelers. I'm not looking for excuses if they end up losing this game.
No.
But having said that, even with the traveling that they've been doing these past couple of days, and will do, and they go back to Houston, I think the Steelers are a talented enough team. I think they're starting to put things together, at least where they can kind of squeak by in a victory here on the road, even with the Texans playing some pretty decent football right now. I have the Steelers winning a 23-20 game, Shayne. So just a little bit under you. Shayne and I are just barely over the over-under for those who are betting on the game this week. The Vegas is pretty good at those lines. And so that's one where I might avoid personally the over-under this week because I can see it going both ways. But I have the Steelers winning 23-20. Shayne has the Steelers winning 24-20. We would love to hear your thoughts. You can drop them down in the comment section. Please consider following us. We go live every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time for this very show. We talk about what happened in the previous week. We preview the upcoming matchup, and we talk about a lot of things Steelers football. So please join us for that. Thank you for joining us today on the Steel Curtain Podcast. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain Podcast. And thanks for listening to the Steel Curtain Podcast.